This is HunterX, a Metroidvania. I initially thought that this game is probably a typical 2D platform game where you get from point A to B and eliminate some bosses along the way. I couldn't have been more wrong. HunterX is actually comprehensive. It contains a large skill tree, a level up system, lots of weapons and items, as well as hordes of different enemies and bosses, all of which have unique mechanics. In addition, there are 52 achievements for the one who is a completionist. Yeah, this is a game that may interest those who love Metroidvanias or who appreciate two-dimensional platform games where character development matters. But despite all this, the question is whether this is an entertaining game. Let's check out HunterX. This indie game was created by the developers of Orange Popcorn and can be purchased in Nintendo's eShop. Currently, the game is discounted and costs $12.74. HunterX can be described as a dark Metroidvania that revolves around exploration and two-dimensional action. Thematically, it feels like moving between a futuristic and medieval world, a world filled with occultism, inhospitable environments, and fearsome enemies. The game has a story, but it doesn't feel so engaging. You play a hunter named Tsuki. She is an ordinary teenager who goes out at night to hunt devils. Somehow she ends up in an alternative world where she meets the worst enemies imaginable. To be honest, it feels like the story lacks depth, but sometimes you interact with different NPCs. They can give an explanation of what is going on, but that is basically what you can expect. There is talk of devil wars and lost people, but this isn't something you get to experience. The game doesn't contain any advanced cutscenes or long dialogues. It's almost like the focus is somewhere else entirely, on the gameplay itself. Therefore, it sometimes feels as if it's difficult to understand the purpose of the game. Why do I do what I do? But the game has a hub where different NPCs are gathered. If you want to get a little more information, you can talk to them. Just like in typical Metroidvania games, exploration is an important ingredient. The two-dimensional world is very large and there are lots of places to visit. Most of the time, however, there are no intricacies involved, no secret paths or anything like that. Rather, it's about gaining new skills that allow you to reach new places. For example, the classic double jump. In this way, you can get to new platforms that were previously impossible to reach. Each area has its own unique style, with enemies, bosses, save stations and teleportals. To be able to navigate, there is a useful map. In true Metroid spirit, it shows where you have been, where you should explore further, and where important places are. I got lost on several locations, but the map is very practical and easy to use. We have seen the layout before, in games like Super Metroid and Blaster Master Zero, for example. It seems to be a design that game developers prefer, and I think the map is just as efficient and easy to use as it should be, no weirdness. However, there are a few puzzles in the game. They can be a little tricky and require you to find different clues. This is a really fun aspect and contributes to the variety, to explore, find important information, and understand the context. This is good. Although there are different types of weapons, they are very similar in design. They have basically the same range, the same swing timer, and the same movements. This is an aspect that makes the game a little worse. Of course, you want an axe to have unique properties compared to, for example, a katana. But if we compare the two weapons, we see how similar they behave. I think this is a shame and something that should be done differently. Admittedly, it's fun to find a new weapon that has better stats than other weapons, but it's just about numbers, to do more harm and do more damage. Your main weapon is always a weapon made for melee combat, but there are secondary weapons that differ, occult spells. These spells are completely unique and are a good complement to your melee weapons. Here are some examples of what they look like. Unfortunately, the use is limited because the spells consume something called occult devotion, but it's possible to expand the use by leveling up. You have a number of attacks at your disposal. You have a normal fast swing, which is about 180 degrees. By pressing Cedar, you can use dash to damage your enemies. This can be effective as the attack can do damage in all directions, particularly effective against airborne enemies. Then there are a number of super attacks. These are called mortal blows. They do a lot of damage but require you to have enough mana. It's also possible to parry attacks. Parry is usable but requires some timing, that you parry the enemy's attacks at the right time. If successful, the enemy's attacks can be reflected, stopped, or make the enemy dizzy. That said, there is a lot of variation. Most attacks are easy to use and the control feels smooth. It's especially fun to combine dash and a normal swing. You're high in the air and use your various skills to damage and eliminate the enemy. It's entertaining. I think the developers have succeeded well in creating a responsive and easy to handle control. The enemies in the game have different abilities. Some are strong in melee combat, others use long-range attacks. Some enemies give a terrifying impression. They look like real killer machines. They are oversized, have dangerous weapons and do a lot of damage. But it's important to figure out how to eliminate them, to understand each enemy's unique characteristics and how to kill them. This is actually fun because there are a plethora of different enemies in the game. It never gets monotonous. The same goes for all bosses. There are many bosses to fight against and they can actually be really challenging. They have a number of different attacks available, and if you don't pay attention, there is a risk that you will die. Sometimes it got really nervous, you know, when you have less than 10% health and the boss has just as little. Who will die first? It's exciting and perhaps the absolute highlight of the game. Fights that offer nerve. HunterX is an indie game that, in my opinion, is worth the money. A two-dimensional adventure game with dark graphics. Most environments give a dystopian impression that is filled with scary enemies and bosses. The game is solid, I didn't experience any crashes, and it flows well both docked and handheld. My playthrough took about 14 hours, but it's definitely possible to do it faster. There is the option to choose between easy and normal mode, but easy is harder than you think. Both the enemies and the bosses make good resistance. The difficulty curve is also well balanced. It gets harder the further you get. The game's problem is really just the story, which I think gives a mixed impression. Nothing memorable really, but by and large I recommend this indie game, especially if you like the Metroidvania genre. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. I review new games every week. Have a good day. See ya!